Hello and welcome to a little bit of a different podcast from the usual Welcome to Friday podcast we do with all the rabble. I've managed to get rid of them and get a quality guest in today, and I'm talking to Alistair Ramsay, who I've been discussing politics with for many years.
Indeed,
since
yeah.
my days at Border Television. Alistair, welcome along. Thank you for coming along for a coffee and a chat today.
Thank you.
It's before we go into the deeper stuff, it's been a hell of a week politically. What have you made of it all?
It's been very turbulent, and I think it's highlighted a number of characteristics of Manx politics. I think it's made, regardless of the merits of the issues themselves, I think it's made Tynwald look quite kind of naive and weak. It's kind of made a bit of a mockery of some of Tynwald's processes, in that these issues had come right through the machinery. It'd all been done, Tynwald resolutions, Comyn agreement. It's the kind of logic of that process runs into the brick wall of politics in an election year. So I think that was interesting. And Tynwald U-turned just at the drop of a hat, And what I thought was interesting as well is that they would have caved in whether or not the opposition was justified. I think if there's a sufficient noise, everyone panics. And a more experienced Tynwald, I think, would have seen that coming.
Have you, in all your years, both at the newspapers as a journalist, and then on the inside where you were at the very heart of Council of Ministers in your role in the government press, have you ever seen anything close to what's happened this week?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there's been a lot of strange stuff, been a lot of nonsense going on over the years, but this is the first time that I've seen the Chief Minister, who in the kind of dying moments of his administration emerges as a kind of opposition figure. He's kind of staged a coup against
himself,
a populist coup against his own government. So it tells us a lot about collective responsibility, and the fact that seems to have disappeared completely now. And he's specialised in throwing people under the bus, and now he's kind of thrown his entire administration under the bus, and they're kind of making this fresh start to impress the public in the last 8 months of the regime.
Well, I mean, that's part of the reason why I wanted to talk to you about this, because people like ourselves that are really interested in politics will find the discussion fascinating. But do you think that Alf Cannon's been a victim of the system he's been presented with? Because I interviewed him back in the autumn.
Yeah, I saw that.
Where I was trying to flush out that, you can't really pick your own team, can you, under the current system? Because you can only pick from who's there.
You can, and it's a very limited squad. And we, the voters, have the same problem. We have very limited choice at election time. So it's true that, and especially with an inexperienced House, I mean, there isn't a lot of talent there. But what strikes me is that he has kept as Treasury Minister someone who was diametrically opposed to him politically, and he's kept him right through the regime until the last minute, when out he goes.
Because he wasn't the original Treasury Minister, though, was he?
No, it was David Ashford.
Who had to...
But Dr. Anson's been in for the best part of 4 years, I think, now, and that, what's transpired this week, and there's I think Mr. Cannon's letter to Dr. Anson says, as you know, we've had all these policy differences over the years, and you're thinking, why would you keep that person in position? And that's a mystery to me. I mean, if I was being cynical about it, I'd say that so that, he's the scapegoat for the entire regime,
But I can't imagine there were people queuing up to do that job. There might have been one or two, but they were probably people that Cannon wouldn't have worked with, maybe. But it's because you've got to also, as I was explaining to someone today, it's all very well saying sack the minister, but you've got to have someone to replace them.
Yeah.
So
Oh no, and then you end up scraping the barrel and going through the bottom of the barrel and so on. But I mean, I think part of the problem with this administration is that it has been this dysfunctional right-left kind of coalition, and it just doesn't work, I don't think. And there have been real tensions and real issues to deal with, like the health service and so on. And I think our system, this kind of consensus system, is now past its sell-by date. Personally, I think it's broken now, and we need a new approach somehow.
I know you've written the article on that, and for those people who are watching this, listening to this, and who are also reading the accompanying article, I'll put a link to your article that you did about how the system could be rehashed, because I think it's the Council of Ministers system, ministerial system, it's been in place now for about 40 years. Maybe just go back to what life was like before that and how the ministerial system came about.
Well, I'm old enough to remember life before the ministerial system. So, and I'm old enough to remember the governor presiding over Tynwald. But
controversial, I think the governor should preside over it again. Do you want to know why now or later?
If you wanted to be really controversial, you could go back to the days when the governor ran the island, because these are very able people.
I didn't want to go that far.
The neo-colonial movement. I see the development of the ministerial system as part of the kind of evolution of Manx democracy coming out of that colonial era. So people often don't realise that the island was basically run on a colonial basis until well after the Second World War. So you're going right up to the 1960s, and the governor was the chief executive, and we had some very good governors actually. We still have, but they haven't got the power. And gradually the power was devolved to local politicians, and we still had a kind of board system of Tynwald where all these disjointed committees. And I can remember trying to make sense of that as a young reporter. I was absolutely baffled going into Tynwald with my notebook. Who's in charge, who's responsible for what? You couldn't work out who was responsible for what, and it was pretty chaotic. So in the 80s, mid-80s, they developed a ministerial system which concentrated the power and the responsibility and the accountability up to a point in a group of people, the Council of Ministers, who were then, obviously they couldn't act unilaterally, they had to get their proposals through Tynwald, but for the first time it gave you an identifiable Manx government. And it was a bit more responsive.
Because it was almost like Tynwald was the government originally.
It was.
Wasn't it?
The distinction between the executive and the parliament, which is supposed to be important, just didn't exist in those days. So the ministerial system at least made government a bit more responsive in theory, so that if there was a proposal came into government, rather than saying, well, we'll have to see what the committee says about this and our next meeting is next month, you'd have a minister who could say, yeah, let's go for it, in theory. So that coincided with a massive economic boom in the mid-80s and the largesse from our very generous VAT arrangements with the UK, which kind of propped us up until the early 2000s when the financial crash hit and our little game was rumbled, and things have tightened up a lot since. So that ministerial system seemed to work pretty well in that positive environment. Now I think things are tightening up and we're facing some really fundamental choices about the future in terms of the size of government, taxation, and what kind of place we want to be, because previously we've been all things to all people. We've been able to afford to have a kind of welfare state with a low tax economy.
It's quite a hybrid, really, in the world, isn't it?
It's it's an exceptional one. And people always used to say, well, how do you do that? And we said, well, it's because of our hugely successful economy, which is partly true, but a lot of it was the VAT agreement. So my view is that we've got to the point now where our system needs to evolve further so that in addition to having a government, you have more public accountability, you have more of a public mandate and more collective accountability at the end of 5 years. So rather than having everybody kind of breaking ranks, including the Chief Minister, and running for the hills and going, just standing on their own merits, you have some sense of, well, who collectively is responsible for what's happened over the last 5 years.
But isn't this the case where you were saying before that, Alf has almost had to throw his own administration under the bus here and admit it's all been, all gone west. That's the problem with the role of the Chief Minister. He doesn't. A lot of people seem to think he has some superpower, when really he can be outvoted. Chris Thomas used the phrase that he was a prisoner within his own council, and that's obviously because of the system he's been presented with. That he was almost with the House that was elected so dysfunctional, which just the way the cards fell. Was he almost destined to fail with this from the start?
Up to a point, but as I say, he could have picked. I'm sure he could have picked a more sympathetic team, and I think, the choice of Treasury Minister in particular is critical. You can't have a left-wing Treasury Minister and a right-wing. You just end up going nowhere. I mean, I keep saying it's like a pantomime horse with two heads. It doesn't work, and it just puzzles me that you would kind of go out of your way to. And of course, there's been such a churn, nearly 30 ministerial changes, we are told, over the period. That's added to the chaos. So, I mean, I accept that the Chief Minister doesn't have as much power as people think, and he is the chairman of the committee. But you can play it. I think you could play it a bit more skillfully. But I think what would help would be if the Chief Minister actually had a stronger public mandate, either through a party system or direct election, so that you actually then form a government with at least some sense of direction from the public behind you, rather than the current system where they all end up in the House of Keys like a bunch of tourists without a map. They're just like, where do we go now?
Love that phrase.
Yeah.
I want to talk about the whole election system in a minute, but as we're still on sort of government, I'll just come back to a couple of things you mentioned there. Tony Brown said to me, I interviewed Tony back in October in his role as head of the local authority. So he's gone full circle. Back now as Mr. Castletown. And we were talking about how things are going, and the reason I was interviewing Tony at the time was to do with the big blow up over Clause 5 of the local government bill. And I said, you're glad to be out of it then? I don't know what's going on, he said. And I said, well, the problem is there's the power of Chief Minister, Tony, as you know. He said, well, I didn't have any problems with that, he said. And I'm sort of paraphrasing here now, but basically he said, when I used to invite people to become one of my ministers, I used to lay down the law, right, if you're joining me, I'm boss, and if I don't like something, it's not going to happen. Now, although you don't have the power to do that, you can lay those ground rules and say, Alistair, if you're going to join my council, you do realise these are my terms, and we can agree now that if there's something I really don't like, please don't do it. And that's how I think he ran. But as you were saying earlier, it was a completely different House of Keys he had to choose from, whereas Alf has had. You mentioned this split between left and right is a very, very different mix of people. And I think if Alf had gone down that route, probably half of them would have said, well, on your bike, mate.
Yeah, maybe he was in a more precarious position. But I think a lot of it is down to the style as well of leadership. But however it's come about, I think the Chief Minister has emerged now, in terms of public perception, in quite a good place. He's been able to kind of detach himself from what's gone before him, and as if this kind of prisoner of his own Council of Ministers narrative, which I don't buy completely, to be honest with you, but like he's been held hostage by these lefties and greenies, and now he's been able to break free, and you know, in this final year they're going to, you know, show the public that they're really trustworthy. And
what did you think of his speech?
It
sort of started off and then it ramped up, I thought.
Yeah, and I thought that subsequent discussion, it was interesting that he started to frame it all as a kind of left-right tension, which I think is quite interesting. And I think that's true. I think a lot of these left-right issues have been submerged in our politics because we kid ourselves that in the Isle of Man we're kind of above that kind of thing. But so many of the decisions and the challenges come down to those fundamental differences in how you view the role of government, how much it should be involved, you know, how much it should spend, how much it should tax. Absolutely fundamental stuff. I think if we'd had the left-right argument 5 years ago, we might have had a bit more clarity. And at the end of the day, he did get the majority support to be Chief Minister.
And he had a challenge as well. Do you remember a challenge to the Chief Minister mid-term in the past? He had that challenge of no confidence?
Oh, to my knowledge, he's the first Chief Minister since the system began to actually get a direct no confidence vote. So that again reflected the rather more turbulent style of this administration.
What, if you compare what Alf Cannon's situation has been over the past couple of years, is there anything from the past that you can remember of similar headaches for Chief Ministers? Has there been anything that's sort of stuck out to you where there's been a real, okay, there wasn't the direct challenge to their leadership confidence, but there's been certainly challenges to their stability of their government?
Oh yeah, there was actually. There was the APG, which was like a kind of opposition group, which included the Chief Minister's own father. And they challenged at one stage, they challenged Donald Gelling, I think. And at this point, Edgar Quine, who was one of the APG leaders, was actually in government. And they kind of challenged Donald from inside. And they had this ridiculous thing where they actually had no confidence votes in all the ministers. Oh, confidence votes. I'm just trying to recall, it was quite a long time ago. So there has been some pretty chaotic stuff in the past.
The APG, well, Brenda Cannell was in that, wasn't she?
It was the Alternative Policy Group, and then it became the Alliance for Progressive Government.
Yes.
But the only thing people had in common there was that they wanted to be ministers, and they mostly weren't. You know. But then you could say that about the Council of Ministers. You know, the only thing they've got in common is that they are ministers.
Yes.
So yes, I don't want to get the impression that we've had this 40 years of harmony that's suddenly tanked. You know, and the environment now is a lot tougher. The financial environment, you know, we haven't got the revenues that we had. The economy has dipped. The international pressures are far greater. You've got, you know, the Moneyval roadshow coming to town. You know, so it is tougher.
And I mean, just before we sort of go into the parliamentary system, we were talking about the governor there, and you were saying about it's come from that old colonial days through. I probably know the answer to this, but listeners and viewers might not. Why did they remove the governor from presiding over Tynwald and create this president of Tynwald role, which is blatantly ceremonial? What difference does it make?
I think that was seen as part of that devolutionary process of, you know, the power passing from the Crown to the locally elected representatives. And it also gave, you know, the opportunity for, members to, as a new hat for members to wear, you know.
Or a new horsehair wig.
The wig, yeah.
Yes.
But I think that was seen as fitting, that, you know, it was no longer appropriate when you've got this, you know, this modern, responsible Tynwald, Manx institution to have this kind of old colonial. And I'm sure it was a great relief for the governors not to have to sit there for 3 days. I can remember these kind of retired admirals nodding off, on day 3, of a particularly turgid city. So, yeah, I think it was just part of the process.
Now, of course, they've got that little box in the corner that they can float into, watch a bit of questions, and then bugger off for a gin and tonic and lunch.
Yeah, I don't know. Well, I don't think they all do gin and tonics.
No, but...
I have very fond memories of some of the gin and tonics that were available at Government House back in the day, especially the Navy ones.
They were,
They were quadruples.
Were they?
Yeah.
Good measures.
Oh, yes.
Good measures. Super. But yeah, I mean, my views changed a little bit, really. I think, well, we have a left... They always say, don't they, never mind the person, look at the post. Well, I mean, we've got a super governor and who gets really stuck in at the moment.
Yeah.
But, future governors might not be as sort of hands-on as Sir John is and his lady wife. But I think, if we're going to have the governor, why don't we get them back to preside over Tynwald, and let's shake the system up and go back to ministers having to be accountable to Tynwald. So, shaking the system up, 40 years of combing, what would you think we could replace it with?
I think I wouldn't go backwards. I would go forwards, and I would develop the ministerial system so that you had a clearer mandate from the public, clearer accountability at the end of the 5 years, and a stronger kind of, not exactly an opposition, but a clearer division between the executive and outside the executive, so that you got more scrutiny and more challenge. I think part of the problem we've had is that everyone's kind of in the team. Well, certainly at the beginning of the regime, everyone's working together, and that's when they make some pretty fundamental mistakes. They kind of go along with stuff because they're all members of the same team. Whereas if people were standing detached, especially had some more experienced people, they would say, hang on, that's not going to work, or, So how you get to that point of getting a clearer public mandate is the tricky bit. I can see the merits of actually having public election of the Chief Minister, but that comes with lots of problems as well.
Yeah.
But if party politics won't take off, and I'm still, it'd be nice to think that it would in a way, but...
Because there's nothing to stop party politics now.
No.
It's
just the culture, really.
But it's the culture of the voters.
Yeah. It's our culture, and I think under our system, you're talking before about how the Chief Minister has a very limited talent pool to draw upon. Well, the same's true of the candidates who come forward for the public. We've got a very limited choice, and I think it's based on just who is a sensible person, and quite often it's somebody you know or you know of, and we don't even get to the kind of politics choice. It's just like, well, I might not like his politics, but at least he's a fairly sound person, and in fact he's the only sound person of the lot. So I think that's where the parties would struggle, is that you might put a load of candidates up, but people would go, well, yeah, but I know him and he's no good.
And is that because the constituencies are too small?
Maybe partly, but yeah, I mean, that might be part of the answer, but I think it's just we're a small community. Like, a very small town in the UK trying to run a national government, complete with all the international regulations, and, I mean, it's a real ask, and that getting the resources and getting people who are, I mean, very, very few of this Tynwald and most Tynwalds are actually proper national politicians. It's just the nature of the scale of the place. We have a lot of local politicians.
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? When you look at what the government does, it's like half county council and parish council. I know we've got the commissioners, but a lot of what Tynwald are debating often is county council stuff.
It is the detail.
And then you've got the higher level stuff. I mean, do you think the Isle of Man has too many functions that really it could palm back to the UK?
I know this is...
Some of these, this is one of my points. Some of these high level ones, like we were talking before we started recording about the lady from the airport, and in that I talk about the Civil Aviation Authority. Well, we're trying to do a bit of that and not very well. Does it affect people negatively if we said, okay, the Isle of Man's not going to do that anymore? We'll just let the UK CAA deal with that. That agency and lots of others that don't really affect our day-to-day operation. Why don't we just get rid of all of that stuff?
I think that some people would see that as a kind of admission of failure, that here we are, this self-governing, proud crown dependency, we do our own thing. But no, I mean, I think that kind of argument would be worth looking into.
Because
really.
we'd be better off doing our own thing in things that matter to people.
Yeah.
Air regulation is something that has to tie in with the UK and Europe and the global industry. We're not resourced to do it. There's other regulators we could, for example, like the Information Commissioner. We just mirror their regulations. So why don't we use their body, for example? I mean, there might be pros and cons, but just saying, as a principle, are we doing too much here, do you think?
Maybe. I mean, I think we always want to do, nuance things to suit our own unique circumstances. I do think there's a question in the modern age, as the requirements of government and regulation, internationally become more and more onerous, financial regulation and so on. Sustaining that on the basis of, a small council is going to be more and more of an ask, actually, and eventually that the weight of that could just, suffocate the place, So maybe there's an argument for looking more broadly, but of course the people who are inside the system have got no incentive for doing that, because you're talking about dismantling local territory.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to explain to somebody, they were saying about the size of government, and I said, yeah, but you've got to realise the population size is quite irrelevant, because the number of functions is the same for us as for people living in Lancashire. All those services and range of things and specialist areas, we still need all of those. So the fact we've only got 80,000 people here doesn't mean we should have a government. One of the things that sends shivers up my spine, and you alluded to this about the numbers game in Tynwald, is when people go, we should halve the number of MHKs. That would be catastrophic.
Yeah.
Because there's virtually no opposition now.
Yeah,
with everybody being in government.
I agree completely, and I think that's one of those kind of urban myths or Manx myths that's developed over the last few years, as if you halve the size of Tynwald, you would then halve the size of the government budget, which, of course, obviously it just doesn't work like that. Government would be the same size, but you'd have an even less healthy political system at the top of it. So no, I think that one needs to be knocked on the head, to be honest with you.
I mean, I said to somebody earlier on, I said, no, I think our parliament should have 50 members. And they said, I said, all right, that number is plucked out of the air. But I said, and they said, why? And I said, well, for example, at the moment you've got your 24, but there's no opposition. Because if you start taking out the chief minister, the ministers, members that then go in departments, members that get appointed to the likes of the Manx Utilities Authority and all these others, where is the opposition? You've run out of people. And then the moment you get a minister resign or fired, the ones that you've already got are out of the frame. You can only then pick from a few. So, and they said, oh, it's ridiculous, all those people, 50,000 people. And I said, yeah, but they're making law that can put you in prison.
Yeah.
Or make and break the economy.
I think there's a strong argument for that. And it's something that Lord Lisfane noted quite strongly when he did his review a few years ago. That kind of, the fact that something like 90% of the Parliament are also involved in government. And he said that's just not That's just not a healthy split, you know. But then we've got the culture here that if you're not in a department working hard, you're sitting there getting your money for nothing. You know, there's no recognition that the parliamentary scrutiny roles are valuable to the public, and actually standing back and challenging half-baked ideas. And my God, we've had enough of those. That's where Tynwald has failed, actually, on that lack of critical scrutiny. And I think that comes down to a lack of confidence and a lack of experience. You know, it's very easy when you're new to that system, you know, first day at Hogwarts and all that kind of stuff. You can be gaslit, you know, and the groupthink is overwhelming to start off with. And then over time you see people finding their feet and, you know, that's just happened. And, but so, I think we've got some real challenges in future. I mean, they're here already, but, you know, going forward, we really need to do something about our system, because we've got the things about, you know, tax and spend, the economy, health service in particular.
Oh, I mean, what did you think what were your predictions when they said they were going to propose splitting off the health delivery service from the DHSS and create Manx care? I know I had my views. I'm interested to know what yours were. Well, what did you predict would happen?
What I thought was that because the whole Manx political culture is based on micromanagement, you know, getting in at a level that's not appropriate, that the politicians would find it very difficult to keep their hands off Manx care. And I get the impression now that, you know, that under the new model in future, there'll be a bit more political influence. Because I think the creation of Manx care, to me, said that part of the problem was political interference. And I know that there has been in the past, you know, your constituents, you know, got some concern, and you've got then a politician interfering in the health system, which, you know, is not good. So the idea of having...
But it wasn't at the stage where that justified setting up a whole new body, does it?
And this comes back to another aspect of Tynwald over the last 10 years in particular, of this kind of naive idealism, you know. So that Manx care as a model was recommended by an expert from the UK. I remember either the Chief Minister or another senior minister saying in Tynwald before the report came out, whatever this man recommends, we're going to accept. So complete abrogation of their responsibility to apply their Manx knowledge to say it may work in an ideal world, but it won't work in the Isle of Man. So they swallowed that model wholesale without any real critical thought about how it would work in the Isle of Man. And it was a kind of ideal world model. And now people are going, well, actually, it's not really that suitable for the Isle of Man in terms of all sorts of things, really.
Because was it? I mean, the whole thing came about because, of course, DHSC were overspending their budget, and they thought this was going to be the silver bullet, and it's just got worse.
No, I mean, and to me, that actually in creating that model, I don't think there was any consideration given to whether it would be more costly or not.
Because it appears to be now less accountable and more costly.
Yeah.
But
actually for politicians, I think it's probably been a good thing, because it gives everyone a football to kick, and it's not them that's getting kicked. And I have a lot of sympathy for Manx care, because I think the fundamental issues about the future of healthcare are political ones, and they've been ducked so far, which is if you want a decent, good, fully functioning National Health Service in the Isle of Man, people are going to have to pay more for it, one way or another. And if you don't want to do that, then you're going to have to accept a kind of split system where a lot of people are going private, and you've got then a basic service for the lower income people. But those, and in fact, Jonathan Michael made it very clear in his report that the way that health costs are accelerating over time, they will have to put more funding in. Now, I know there's the issue in the meantime about how efficient and what value for money Manx care is, and I think we need to get clarity on that first. But once you've sorted that out, you've still got a lot more costs to meet if you want a proper National Health Service in the Isle of Man. And I don't think the politicians have ducked that, because obviously it's very difficult to tell people they're going to have to pay more. And you saw the reaction to the health service levy that Dr. Allinson kind of went out on a limb and proposed. Very hostile reaction. And one of the reasons why people are so hostile is that they are convinced that government and Manx Care are already wasting their money. So you can't ask for more until you've persuaded people that actually we have made some cuts here, and we. But they've just completely lost that narrative, I think.
Do you think, sort of, if they do go down if they do start making the Isle of Man a higher tax place, what the implications of that are? Because obviously we've already got quite expensive costs of living, so that's going to have a huge amount. They're already saying they can't attract younger people to come back to the island. They're going off to university and then just aren't coming back.
Yeah, I think that's always been true to an extent. People.
But we did have that those booming industries, and then we had the e-gaming, which seems to be now slowly coming to its knees, and that was creating a lot of jobs for younger people in that sort of tech element. Yeah. It's like what's going to happen now? But I don't know what the answer to that is. What do you think the next? We said about the system needs urgently reforming, but one thing that the public don't like is when Tynwald starts talking about itself. So a new house coming in September, if we urgently need to reform the whole setup, get rid of combing, replace it with something else, blah, de blah, de blah. It needs to happen. I can't see that happening.
No, I can't, and I think
it desperately needs to.
The public are rightly impatient with this kind of navel gazing. What the public needs to realise that the proper reform is about giving the public more say in what kind of government they have, and what the future of the Isle of Man is going to look like. We haven't had that. We've had this. All you can do is pick a decent local chap or lady to represent your particular part of the island, and then what happens on the wider front is out of your hands, and they'll kind of make it up amongst themselves as they go along. At the end of 5 years, your representatives will come back to you and you'll say, actually, it's been a bit of a shit show this last 5 years. And they'll say, yeah, I agree. And you'll go, yeah, but weren't you involved in the government?
Yeah.
Well, only
what
that
did you do about it?
But there's no collective accountability because everyone has broken ranks, and spectacularly so in the case of the Chief Minister himself this week. I mean, I said last year when I was droning on about something that, we'd see in election year everyone breaking ranks and distancing themselves from the government. And I said maybe even the Chief Minister will do that.
So you saw this coming.
But then I thought, no, you're being too cynical, But you can never be too cynical when you're dealing with politics, can you?
I mean, one of the things that you'd said in the paper that you'd written, the article that you'd written, that I know we published it, and some of the other outlets also published it because it was so fascinating to us that are interested in this.
Yeah.
But I think although this subject to a lot of people, it's glazed over, it's boring, it's politics, but it's so serious because it's at the very heart of what affects every man, woman and child on the island.
Yeah.
Just explain this problem we have where we can't actually vote for a government or a leader here. People don't understand that.
No, and it's fundamental, I think, that we don't vote a government in and we can't vote one out.
So what have we got?
So I say it's just purely a local. Our franchise is kind of limited to your local representative, and then they sort it out amongst themselves. And then the government isn't a thing at the election, and it's dissolved by the time of the next election. And that leads to very major problems of accountability and mandate. So you have issues like in the past, how green should the Isle of Man go? How green can we afford to be? And we've kind of drifted into that because it was kind of politically fashionable for everyone to say, oh yes, I'm in favour of net zero, without anyone thinking of the implications. Nobody really knows what the majority of the Manx public think about that. We've all got our guesses about what the ordinary person thinks. But our system doesn't test that. It just.
But we very nearly, well, I say nearly, there was proposals for a referendum on that, and you could use the argument for any subject, but use net zero as an example. And it was going to be done at the same time as the general election, which seemed sensible, but they voted against it.
Yeah.
But what signal did that send out to the public?
I think a lot of people took that quite badly, and the argument was, well, we don't need a referendum because the election itself will serve as a form of referendum on this issue.
Which is a cop-out, isn't it?
It is a cop-out because our elections don't really work like that. I'd like to think they do, so that you have, a fairly clear national agenda of issues that candidates are pinned down on, and this is where the media can do its job and does its best, I know. But it's very difficult when you've got candidates. See, some of the candidates don't actually have any views on big issues, some of them. They really, they're just kind of putting themselves forward, a very kind of amateur night basis, and they kind of develop as they go along. I've worked with very senior Manx politicians who I don't think had any policies at any point ever in their lives.
Blimey.
Not all of them, just by no means. Some of them had some very strong policy ideas.
And of
so you can actually get away, you can have a very successful career in Manx politics without having any clear policies at all.
Crikey. So this next election, as we said, people still don't understand that they're not electing a government. And that's fundamental. And that's why I say it's problematic that we say the system's going to have to change, but how and when?
And also the other problem is that of engagement. We've got declining public engagement in the election process. And that's a kind of generational thing. It's people like my age and, who tend to vote. And that's probably true everywhere. But one of my concerns is that you've got lots of new people in the Isle of Man. And we welcome members of the community. We want them to get involved and get engaged. They must find it very, very difficult to understand our politics. I've spoken to people in the past, new residents from the UK, and you say, did you vote in the last election? No, because I couldn't tell the difference between these candidates, which made me think, I know the difference because I know them.
Yeah.
I went to school with one of them.
The local characters.
Yeah, or I know of them.
Yeah.
I know his reputation. If you've only arrived here a couple of years ago, you think these people all look and sound the same. You know. I think that may be changing now. I think there's maybe a bit more colour coming into it, but and it's a worry because, as you say, our politics are really important, and I think because we've been so lucky in the last half century, really, we take so much for granted. We assume that government will always have enough money, that there'll always be enough jobs. It's not actually that long ago when there was unemployment up to about 2000, early 80s.
And in terms of having enough money, I was one of the views that because of exactly what we've been talking about and trying to change this system, and I don't think the first thing on their agenda come September is going to be to shake up the whole system of Tynwald and change it to a non-ministerial system. But is it going to be the case where it's going to be change is only going to come through a nuclear option where if we run out of money, they're going to be forced to have to change the whole system? Presumably the UK would have to put some temporary administration
Well,
in if we,
yeah,
because it's happened in other places.
it has, and I hopefully we're a long way off that. And you say it's very difficult for the politicians to change our system, because if you're a politician, it's a very convenient system. It allows you to take part in government at all levels without actually being held responsible for the collective outcome of what you're doing. You know, and you just get in on the kind of, you know, basically on your constituency work by and large, unless you kind of screw up big style at a national level, and then you probably get some kickback on that. So I don't think the politicians themselves will change it. So you then need some kind of public movement to change it. And as you say, the public think, well, constitutional stuff, boring.
It's yeah.
The parties, I know there are parties trying to develop. Interesting to see what happens with them, but
We've seen them come and go over the years, parties,
We have, yeah.
and they've never really taken off.
I think the onus is actually on the sitting members if they're standing again for election. They can't use the excuse that they're newcomers and they haven't got the experience and they don't know what's what. I think the onus is on them to make a clearer stand about where they actually stand on these big issues. Obviously the temptation is to try and be vague and be all things to all people, because if you stand on one side of the fence, you're going to lose the people on the other. But I do think they have a responsibility to be clearer about the national issues. I think the rest of us have a responsibility to really pin them down, including the media, and I know you guys will do your best.
We'll do our best.
Yeah. And the public as well. You know, don't take a load of vague waffle from people.
I was going to say, what's your advice to voters?
Yeah.
What should they be?
I think the sitting members should be required to justify their involvement in what's been happening nationally. I think the new candidates, I don't think you can expect them to have all the answers, but you can expect them to show some knowledge of the issues and actually have done some homework. Because in the past, you get candidates who obviously haven't even done any basic homework. You know, have they read the island plan? Are they aware of what's been happening over the last 5 years? What do they think has gone wrong? If they think it's gone wrong, you know, and if so, what would they do differently? You know, and get them to tell you what they think, because there's a pattern of going round. I remember some candidates literally with clipboards going around, you know, getting the constituents to tell them what they think, which is good, but we want to know what the candidates think, and what would they do? What would they do differently?
Because there'll be obviously lots of public meetings coming up soon, and all the rest of it. In terms of two things, the Chief Minister, we alluded to this earlier on about some sort of public mandate.
Yeah.
And we briefly, because we said there's challenges with that, and Legislative Council.
Oh.
So which one do you want to start with first? What should we?
Chief Minister, I think there's a lot of merit in public election of the Chief Minister, because I don't think there's enough resource at kind of Keys candidate level to have credible parties. I'd like to think I was wrong, but I'm not sure that's going to pick up the people who should be able to offer the public competing national visions of the future are the chief ministerial candidates. And there is something profoundly wrong with that discussion about who's going to be the next chief minister happening away from the public. We're completely excluded from that. But if you did have a publicly elected chief minister, that would get all the rest of Tynwald off the hook for what was happening on the national stage, because it would be everything that went wrong. They'd say, well, it's him, you voted for him.
So how would they, because this is the fascinating thing about that, would you end up with effectively a position like the President of the United States? Because, okay, we elect the Chief Minister, then the 23 others in there go, well, we didn't choose him. And they just don't... How much power...
Well, that's it.
You know,
yeah,
what would happen? Are we a kingmaker?
That's the
In which case, what's the point of the others? You know?
That's the argument that's always used. Oh, it's a presidential system. It's contrary to our system. Actually, some people who are a lot more learned than me have pointed out that the Isle of Man had a presidential system when we had the governors running the show. They were kind of presidents, but that's a kind of academic point. And the fear is that, you know, you'd have this kind of Manx Donald Trump,
Yeah.
which would be hilarious in a way, but you wouldn't necessarily. They wouldn't necessarily have unlimited power. Formally they would have the same power that they've got at the moment, but their political authority would be a lot greater, I think.
But would that just be like a perception? And I think this is where the challenges come, isn't it? Because they might have the perceived authority, but under legal authority, they could say, yeah, I know you're elected, but actually you haven't really got the power. It's just a theoretical power.
You might need to enhance their power a bit.
Yeah.
Give them a kind of ultimate power.
Because they'd have to surely have a level of executive functions to go with this role. Otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah, and also there's the question about what happens if the Parliament and the publicly elected Chief Minister are at loggerheads. And there is an island in the Pacific, I think, where they have a publicly elected Chief Minister. And their system, if there's a stalemate between the Chief Minister and the Parliament, is that there's a general election.
Blimey.
So it all goes back to square one, which is then a disincentive for the Parliament to kick off too much, and also for the Chief Minister. But
you're then in danger of getting nothing done, aren't you?
You've got kind of stalemate there. But I think the biggest risk is that it makes the MHKs even more parochial, because they don't need to talk about national stuff at all. The national election's happening up, somewhere else, and they can just... and they've got no responsibility at all then for... So
it could be quite a dangerous...
Yeah, I think
it sounds good on paper. Sounds good on paper? That's a strange analogy, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sounds good in theory.
I mean,
looks good on paper.
Ideally, if we knew at an earlier stage who the chief ministerial candidates were, earlier in the year, so before the general election rather than after, you could then ask your Keys candidates, well, who would you vote for if you got in, so that you'd have an indirect. But then, of course, the feeling there is that would kind of, for the people who are putting their names forward as Chief Minister, that would kind of be preempting the outcome of their constituency election.
It's very messy, isn't it?
Yeah. So there aren't any simple solutions, but I think that there is a big problem there. You said Legislative Council.
Yeah, I mean, Legislative Council have never been so sort of, are they still there? Are they turning up? Because nobody really hears of them these days.
I would have agreed with you a short while ago. I think they're flexing their muscles a bit more now, and you've got some new members. I mean, there's a new member who had a successful Tynwald motion this week about homeless strategy, and congratulations to her. They are, I think they're finding their feet a bit more, but I would agree that in the past I would see one of their main roles as being a scrutiny role and a challenge role to the Keys, because the executive power is concentrated in the Keys. The Legislative Council has that ability to stand back, be a bit detached, and challenge policy proposals, not just the detail of the legislation. In the past, there's been this view that it's the kind of back office for the executive, and you're looking for spelling mistakes and what have you. I'd like to see them say, look, you haven't put forward a business case for this. It's half-baked, and they should have been doing that along with the backbench members of the House of Keys.
But they've not been doing that, have they?
No, they haven't. And I think, again, part of the problem is that it's difficult to be too challenging with a body that is actually putting you in the job in the first place. Yeah. So I think the Keys are the wrong people to be appointing Legislative Council. I do think we need a second chamber.
I would agree.
Yeah.
I'm still not too sure how a public. I know how a public vote. It'd be quite simple to have a public vote, but then there was always that argument that they'd have a bigger mandate than the Keys with fewer people.
Yeah.
I don't entirely buy that argument, but as you say, there is a tendency at the moment of, well, you have to your paymasters and they elect you, and people might not want to rock the boat
and
too
I think
much.
the other thing, the interesting trend that's happened in recent years, was that it became very unfashionable to put retiring MHKs up there. And obviously there was a bit of a retirement home feel about it, you know. But when you stopped doing that, you lost a lot of experience. And I would like to have seen some of the people from like 10, 15 years ago in Ledgeco, you know, because these people can spot the pitfalls, you know. We tried that 10 years ago and it didn't, you know. Admittedly, you also need the fresh blood from outside, but I think if you had more of a balance, but you need people who know their way around the Manx political system.
The other problem is, of course, that it doesn't sit well with the public, whereas if you've got an MHK who maybe loses their seat, they might have good experience and something to give. So you'd almost have to redefine the role a bit. But what it would be seen as is a reward for failure. You know, they failed at the ballot box and they've now gone up, which is why I think the Ledgeco elections are staggered anyway.
Yeah.
But they'd have to stand down before going upstairs. But there's not been a lot of a fuss in this administration over Ledgeco, to be honest. Maybe it's because everything else has been going on. They've been very, very sort of in the shadows.
But I guess every Tynwald has its favourite hobby horses, don't they? And you know, it's interesting in the past that if you want to show that you believe in democracy, you know, Ledgeco has been the sitting target for that. Whilst people have, you know, ignored the far bigger problem of the fact that we have a government here that nobody voted for.
Well, yeah.
That's almost too big to see, that problem.
So, just to sort of wrap up then, I want to sort of end on something that's a bit more light-hearted. In your time, what are the big moments you've really enjoyed, either from your days in journalism or during your days as the government press officer, who we of course, in my days in border television, and would ring you up, and you know, you'd fix up all these interviews, political things that have gone over. Have you got any really great little stories of things that you particularly remember?
Gosh,
some of the characters that you worked with.
There were a lot of characters. Gosh, you put me on the spot there. I do remember when the VAT bombshell hit in post the 2008 financial crash. So it was about 2010, something like that. So basically we were losing 200 million a year out of the future budgets. And I used to sit in Council of Ministers every week for my sins, which I did for 18 years. And the first political reaction to that was to stop the free biscuits at Council of Ministers meetings. And that was quite good. Yeah,
I was in Tynwald at the time, and I was furious with this financial crash, because they also stopped the nice lunches we used to get occasionally. When departments did a presentation, they'd put a sandwich lunch on. Occasionally, you got a hot pot or something, and that all stopped as well. So it was a disaster.
But that used to be the thing, that if you know the members' presentations, they always used to say you had to put on a good spread to get people there. Yeah.
And I could see the point of that, because it was the lunch hour, and if you come out of a session and wanted to go straight into that, you'd get nothing to eat. So
I think actually it's become a bit more austere now. I think it's probably sandwiches.
I believe it is, yeah.
And rightly so.
Who are the big political heavyweights that you recall from, I mean, even from sort of before your time, really, in that role?
Well, I mean, Charles Carrouche was one of the most famous statesman. I only worked with him as a young reporter, but we were always told that if we were short of a lead story, give Charlie a ring. And he knew exactly what was going on. You're short of a story, you give me 15 minutes. And he'd then ring you back with this kind of great denunciation of something, which you could then use for your lead story. I think Miles Walker was probably the kind of model of a Manx statesman that people look back to, and he did the 10 years, of course, which nobody else has done. And I mean, obviously, those days were not without their problems at all.
He wasn't without his scandal, the Manx radio scandal. Do you remember that, when he was going to sell it to Brian Kreisky?
Yep.
That was a big fuss.
Oh, there was.
I was working for Manx Radio at the time.
There was a lot of, I mean, yes. I mean, there was always
you look back
stormy
at those
waters. You know, there always were. I think in terms of, from a media point of view, we always used to think in terms of when the UK media would come over, you know, you'd have to wheel out Manx politicians to something like Panorama or someone, and that wasn't always an easy process because with the best will in the world, you know, the Manx politicians aren't used to that level of profile. The one person who could do that was Alan Bell. He was the only one, and he wasn't the easiest guy to work with, and I'm sure he would understand me saying that, but when you had somebody, when the heat was on internationally, he would perform. And of course he did that where he went to that big international conference in London, I think, about tax and regulation and so on, and he stood up and kind of denounced the hypocrisy of some of the people who were there, and for picking on the little guys when some of the big countries were far worse in terms of being tax havens. And I remember that was one of the highlights, you know, as a kind of proud Manx moment. And there weren't many people, if any, who could have carried that off.
And what do you think the likes of, you know, you look back at some of these characters, and even the likes of someone who was a good friend of mine was the likes of Eddie Lowy and people like that. I mean, what do you think Sir Charlie would be making of the current debacles?
Gosh, I don't know. Probably not impressed, I should think. And you talk about people like Eddie Lowy, there you had...
Because Eddie was there forever.
He was, and people go, oh, you know, he's like a life peer or something.
Yes.
But again, he had the experience, you know, and the wisdom, and was able to kind of share that with the rest of Tynwald from Legislative Council latterly. And that was a really useful resource to have for members, I think, that if you get rid of all the ex-MHKs from that chamber, you lose it. The lack of experience has been one of the big issues in recent years. And I think that's a challenge for this next election, that the public may be tempted to, you know, kick them all out. But if you do, you could be losing some quite people with potential and who've at least got 5 years experience now, and you replace them what? You go back to zero and start again.
Blimey. Well, it's been, I mean, we could talk about this all day, but it's been fascinating to hear your views on things, Alistair.
Thank you.
It was great days working with you when we used to ring you up, and great fun. And we only used to sort of imagine what you were dealing with behind the door. You know, what does Alistair really know was going on?
I know, it's a good job I can't remember most of it.
Probably a relief to many politicians
indeed,
that are still around. But anyway, I mean, thanks for coming in for a chat. Really enjoyed it. And I'm sure as this next election approaches, we will be chatting again, no doubt.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah.
Brilliant. Thanks very much.